I bet you didn't know that the risk of death associated with childbirth is approximately 14 times higher than that with an abortion. I'm only betting you didn't know because I didn't know. That the fact of the matter is that abortion is an extremely safe procedure with a safety record of over 99%. So why is it illegal? We know that nothing stops abortion. No law or government or legislature or governor, no religion or religious authority. And the only thing that making abortion illegal does is create more deaths for women. On July 25th, 2023, the Ohio Capitol Journal ran an article. An all-male panel of anti-abortion religious leaders from around the country met in Georgia to discuss the strategies that should be used to end abortion in every state at any stage of pregnancy, without exceptions for rape and incest, and with criminal punishment for the pregnant person in line with existing criminal penalties for murder, which includes the death penalty. With restricted abortion access and potential criminal punishments for women who seek abortions, it is not just the death penalty that will kill them. Many of these women will also die in childbirth. In the U.S., maternal mortality is rising, increasing more than 2 times since 1990. And on a daily basis in the world, 800 people die from pregnancy. For people who live in the U.S. and abortion-restricted states, it's even worse. Pregnancy and childbirth are 1.5 times more likely to kill a woman than a traffic accident.
We do a large injustice to women because we do not, once women are pregnant, they're seen as hosts. And we have to do anything we can to get that baby. And it's just like, but if she dies and the baby lives, you don't have a mama. Is that going to be what we want? Especially after having one child, that's not even on the table. If something happens to me and I get pregnant and it's not going to go well and it's me or that child, I already have 2 kids that I need to help take care of. Like, I do have a spouse who is fantastic, but would it do my children better for me to die in childbirth because someone voted that way? For them to have a little sibling and no mom?
There was a guy with a sign, and I don't remember what the sign said, but something about, like, abortion is murder. He had a megaphone. He's, like, yelling into it, and that, like, shook me to my core. I went back to my apartment and, like, couldn't do anything for the rest of the day. I lost it. I, like, called my mom and I was like, I've murdered someone. And I was like, I'm a horrible person. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make with that is that people who have been through this shouldn't, like, try to hide themselves or pretend to be someone they're not simply for the comfort of others' beliefs.
This rhetoric of killing a child, though, doesn't really exist anywhere prior to 1980. Within Roe v. Wade, the opinion states we are also told, however, that abortion was practiced in Greek times as well as in the Roman era, and that it was recorded without scruple. The fetus was to be regarded as part of the mother, and its destruction, therefore, was not homicide.
I felt like a horrible person. Like, truly and honestly, I was like, I'm the worst person. Even up until now, and we're 2 years later, I feel like I've failed step 1 of being a mom. And I know that I haven't, and I've worked in therapy on that and, like, talked about it, and I understand, like, logically that that's not true. Because I don't regret having an abortion. Like, no part of me regrets it. The way people talk about abortions, not all people, but many people, as if you have an abortion, you're a murderer and you've done something wrong. that I think, or you've killed a child. And I think that is also where I feel like I've messed up as step one of being a mom. Like, well, I didn't even make it past like the beginning of being pregnant.
We actually, in the state of Tennessee, cared about women and children. We would allow women to make their own decisions, and we would also allow them to have any kind of assistance. The way that our systems are set up, it is so difficult to get the help that you need. And we anti-abortion activists talk about pro-life all day long, but it's not pro-life if you force someone to have a baby that they couldn't afford and then don't do jack shit after that. There's just that's not your platform. We're missing some terminology and some definitions here. We're definitely off, not on the right track. So no, and that is one of the things that's one of the reasons why I've worked in this field so long, is because I have been there with my grandma, not my grandmother, but the grandmother that's on my caseload, who has 5 babies, 5 girls under 5, twins, a single, twins, and her daughter is pregnant again with twins. Can't get an abortion, has no intention of having these children or keeping them. And I have walked through that process of Vanderbilt calling this grandmother and saying, she left, come get your babies. And then she calls me and says, what the hell am I supposed to do? And I say, well, let's find some diapers. Let's find some formula. What do we need to do? Where do we need to get it? But just watching cases like that where people have been through these things and struggled, and this mom did exactly what our state lawmakers want her to do. She got pregnant and gave them the babies.
Yeah, I think what's so frustrating about this obsession with the fetus that our state legislators have is that they don't recognize the reality of the child and what the child and the family needs and the kinds of social supports that they need. We're even on this crazy idea that we're not going to support public education anymore in Tennessee. I mean, it's absolutely infuriating. So we don't have, a living wage in Tennessee. We don't have Medicaid expansion. We don't have all kinds of protections for kids in their early years with early childhood education, paid, public preschool, and now talking about this crazy vouchers idea that's taking dollars away from public schools. So they're hypocrites and they're cruel to even to ever force a woman to bring a child into this world without those kinds of supports.
Motherhood is a 24-hour-a-day occupation. There are no vacation or sick days or paid time off, and you can't retire from this job until you die, which is why pro-choice activists are now calling for lawmakers to argue that abortion rights should fall under the 13th Amendment, linking a woman's forced labor with involuntary servitude.
This issue is not just the life and death of the fetus. It is the life and death of the person carrying that fetus and their entire rest of their lives.
Being a woman and having a uterus is probably one of the heaviest things you'll find yourself with. I know that each woman needs to choose, and now when I realize that women can't choose, they can't make a decision in certain states, and in some states their doctors can go to prison for helping them. It makes me really sad because it seems like we're going backwards.
Up until the Dobbs decision, however, abortion rights had been argued under the 14th Amendment, stating that it is a woman's right to privacy that gives her the right to choose whether or not she gets pregnant. And in the Dobbs decision, it states, in interpreting what is meant by liberty, the court must guard against the natural human tendency to confuse what the 14th Amendment protects with the court's own ardent views about the liberty that amendment should enjoy. For this reason, the court has been reluctant to recognize rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution. Women's autonomy is the most threatening to the power structure, which is still predominantly male. And this is why women and their reproduction had to be controlled.
You know, if we want to go back in time, Tennessee passed a constitutional amendment banning abortion in 2014. And it was done in an election that was a super low turnout election, and where the proponents of the ballot measure really didn't tell the public the truth about what they were voting for, and a lot of voters were very confused, and it barely won, and people had really no idea what the implications of that ballot measure were. And so now it says in our Constitution that nothing in this Constitution secures or protects the right to an abortion. That's the beginning of the sentence, and it's the most important part of it, and it's what's allowed our state to ban it after the Dobbs decision. So after Donald Trump was elected and our opponents realized that they may get the opportunity for Roe to fall at some point, they started passing really symbolic laws at that point to ban abortion in Tennessee completely. So in 2019, they passed a trigger ban, which was what we're living under now, which is a complete and total ban on abortion once Roe fell, with no exceptions. They passed a 6-week ban, an 8-week ban, a 10-week ban, a 12-week ban, you know, all the way up to viability, in case when Roe fell, it looked a little bit different than what they were hoping, which was allowing us to completely ban abortion. So they were ready for anything to happen in 2022 when the Supreme Court made their decision about Roe. To their delight, they were able to completely ban abortion. And so in June of 2022, we were abortion providers one day, and a couple of days later, we weren't abortion providers. We made the decision not to operate under a 6-week ban, which was in effect for just a few weeks before the trigger ban went into effect, just because of our risk tolerance at Planned Parenthood is a little bit different than other providers. Knowing that the full ban was coming, we went ahead and made the decision to stop. And it was horrible, you know, to have the infrastructure that we have, the expertise that we have, the providers that we had, ready and willing to help anyone who needed that health care, and to have to stop completely was really heartbreaking.
It is not illegal to have an abortion or have a self-managed abortion, but it is illegal for a doctor to perform an abortion. So because there's really a lot of misunderstanding of the law, and that does limit people from seeking care. And I've seen the negative consequences of that on the opposite end, when maybe they're parenting with someone that isn't safe now because they didn't seek an abortion, where a child is being brought into the world in really unsafe conditions, which is really unfortunate for that child. I always said I was pro-child, pro-choice, meaning we really need to be focusing on what's best for that child that someone might be bringing into the world.
In 2022, President Biden signed an executive order to safeguard abortion access. The order included protections for those who travel from a state that prohibits abortion to a state where the service is illegal. Regarding Tennesseans, it is assumed out-of-state abortions will increase by at least 3% in 2023 and then again in 2024. In addition, between 2019 and 2020, there were an average of 507 abortions per year in Tennessee for residents under the age of 18, leading to the introduction of House Bill 1895.
House Bill 1895 would criminalize behaviors for anyone that helped assist someone to go to a state or a location where they could have a legal abortion. And so, giving someone a ride to a state, nearby state, that would be open for abortions. Calling to schedule an appointment for someone could be an assisting a person to move outside the state for an abortion. Giving them money to help fund a plane ticket or, rent a car for them. All of those behaviors would actually be a criminal offense, and someone could be prosecuted and subjected to whatever criminal law the statute would allow for.
So what am I concerned about with this bill? I'm concerned that they're criminalizing the helpers in our state, the healthcare providers, the social workers, the school counselors, people who are really trying to be an advocate for somebody who doesn't have that support at home. Not trying to go around the parents, but people who are professionals, who understand, mandatory reports. They understand, the social structures and the limitations that are existing in a child's life, and they understand how to do it appropriately, legally, to support a minor in getting the services that they need. Those are the people that are being criminalized here. Nurses, doctors, social workers, counselors, teachers, and other family members who are oftentimes like a grandparent who may not be a child's legal guardian, but is in essence their parent. Those are the people who are being criminalized under this law, and we're really concerned about it.
If passed, HB 1895's legislation will result in roughly 1.86 additional admissions to prison annually, and those admissions will serve roughly 1.52 years. In addition, in House Bill 0883, the one that criminalized abortion in the state of Tennessee, regardless of rape or incest, it states that the Department of Health collect the reports concerning the disposition of aborted fetal tissue that are required by present law and report quarterly the number of abortions performed in the state to the governor, the Speaker of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and the chairs of the Health and Welfare Committee of the Senate and the Health Committee of the House of Representatives no later than January 1st, April 1st, July 1st, and October 1st of each year. What that means is a woman who has had a miscarriage or someone who has had an abortion must report their fetal remains to the governing legislative bodies. What this eerily echoes is the Comstock Act of 1873, which made it illegal to send obscene, lewd, or lascivious, immoral, or indecent publications through the mail. Comstock vigorously enforced the sections in the act that dealt with birth control. Numerous doctors suffered arrest and conviction for supplying written materials explaining pregnancy and how to prevent it. The breadth of this legislation included writings or instruments pertaining to contraception and abortion, even if written out by a physician. So when thinking about HB 0883 and HB 1895, it is much bigger than just an abortion. It is controlling the lives of women so that they must have children.
What's happening here in Tennessee, really making it so there's no abortion access. We haven't seen what, for example, happened in Ohio, where the miscarrying woman was arrested very publicly and then luckily, subsequently, those charges were dismissed. But, we have not yet seen that here in Davidson County.
So far we've not seen a prosecution of a healthcare provider under the abortion ban, but I think it's primarily because healthcare providers are not providing abortion. I mean, we're not doing it anymore. We're under a really scary consequences situation here, where not only are you facing a felony, you're facing prison time, and you're going to lose your license. And in Tennessee, the organizations that employ the person who breaks the law are also criminally liable. So it's, institutions are at risk as well as individuals. So I think people are being, very careful and cautious about what they're doing, and the result is that women's lives are at risk. Yeah, the abortion ban affects everybody. It affects absolutely everybody, but the deeper impacts will be on people with the fewest resources, and that's going to be disproportionately Black and brown people in our communities who are already facing significant barriers to any kind of health care. So when we were providing abortion services, the patients that were most vulnerable were often Black and brown patients, but they were low-income patients generally who had comorbidities with their pregnancy, and that was often one of the reasons why they were seeking an abortion. It might not have been life-threatening in the immediate term, but it would have long-term consequences for their health. They already had other children. You know, they had chronic conditions. They were diabetic, or they had hypertension. They had a history of preeclampsia. You know, there were all kinds of situations that people would come and say, I can't put my body through this again. I can't put my family through this again. And so those are the people most at risk. Not to mention the people who have these catastrophic, you know, fetal anomalies, healthy women, women of privilege, who want to be pregnant and have these catastrophic fetal anomalies. Those are a lot of the stories that have surfaced because these brave women have told their stories, which have educated all of us about how complicated and dangerous pregnancy can be. But there are a lot of untold stories, stories that aren't as dramatic, but still so very consequential for the individual.
I found myself pregnant with a set of spontaneous triplets. And we went to the doctor, surprise, you're pregnant. And it was like, oh, neat. And then we did an ultrasound and the doctor was like, well, that's weird. Sends me to the specialist on the other side of the hall, and the specialist was like, and sent me back. Nobody's telling me anything. I'm here by myself. I just took like 30 minutes off because I was like, oh, we're just going to do a blood draw. And so after an hour and a half of going back and forth between ultrasound techs, I was informed that I had a wonky little kind of weird thing going on, was how the doctor had told me, and that I had a set of mono twins and a singleton. So after 2 to 3 weeks of every 3 to 4 days going in and getting an ultrasound and being told, yep, it's still weird, things are weird, one of the heartbeats stopped. One was still really, really faint and one was still going. And the doctor was basically like, it's not gonna work out. We can do a D&C, I'll hop down on my lunch. And it was just like, what? And so I went from absolutely not, never ever, to this is my main choice. If I want to have more kids, I've got to make this decision.
I met this man who was involved in this movement in San Jose at the time, which was various agencies, social service agencies banding together, and I thought a lot of him. He was a paroled prisoner. He was paroled on a murder charge, which he actually did it. He never said, oh, I'm innocent. He said, yeah, I killed the guy. He ratted me out, I killed him. But I found him fascinating, and we went out, and I didn't know much about alcoholism at that time. I smoked pot with my friends at that time. It was early 70s. I got into my worst drug addiction later, but at that time, I didn't realize that he was an alcoholic. So one day he picked me up and took me to his apartment, and he was cooking dinner for me, which I thought was very sweet and kind of retro. And all of a sudden he starts drinking, and then all of a sudden he started smacking me around, and he basically trapped me in his apartment for 3 days. And at the end of the 3 days, he mercifully fell asleep when I got out of there. And he was harassing me where I lived by the phone. He broke into our house and stole some personal items of mine. I was really afraid, and a friend decided they were going to help me, and I escaped to Phoenix, where I lived with another friend. And about a month after I got there, I was feeling kind of weird and thought I was kind of sick, and I went to the doctor, and it turned out I was pregnant, and I was freaked out because I hadn't planned this baby, and this was the last thing I wanted to do, was have his baby. I was in mortal fear of him, as I am to this day, but I Google him a lot and I can't find him anywhere, so maybe he's not with us anymore. I don't know. So I went to a Planned Parenthood clinic, and they gave me the requisite counseling about alternatives, adoption, keeping the baby, etc. And I said, no, I do not want to have this baby.
Every 4 years, the Tennessee Department of Health releases the Maternal Mortality Review. The most recent one is from 2022, and in this review it states that providers should utilize trauma-informed practices and screen for domestic violence at every visit throughout a woman's reproductive years. If domestic violence is suspected or disclosed, a social work consult should be initiated to support education and referral to community-based services. This is especially important because children born from unwanted pregnancies can experience a lack of attachment with their mothers, delayed cognitive and behavioral and emotional development, and higher likelihood of experiencing domestic violence themselves. The United States in particular is a very difficult place to be a mother. It has inaccessible and expensive healthcare, no paid leave from work, crumbling infrastructure, including public schools, and more.
The way that our laws are set up, looking at it on paper, the only time that we care about children is when they're in utero or potentially within their first 5 years of being born, as long as their parents fill out all the right paperwork and we give them some formula and cheese. There's just not, it is not set up for anyone to benefit. I've worked in social service for 16 years, and I have seen just about everything that you can when it comes to child welfare. I have seen what happens to babies whose parents don't want them, and I do not have much confidence in our adoptive and foster care system. I have worked in far too many scenarios where those systems have completely and utterly failed the children that they're supposed to be helping. But we don't have the training, we don't have the information, and we just do not have the capacity to do that.
And then I saw it a lot with pregnant teens. So maybe that teenager was in DCS custody, they're pregnant, they're in a foster home, and then when that baby is born, there's a lot of pressure on that teen to put that baby into DCS custody as well. The foster parents want a lot of times an additional board payment, and they wouldn't get that if that baby is not in foster care. And so we are not doing right by pregnant teens in Tennessee in that regard.
And then I have a child who's 16, 17, and is probably unable to raise their child without lots and lots and lots of help. And probably are in a situation, if they're coming to me, where there's already a lot of trauma in their home and a lot of lack in their home already. And so now we're going to force that person to have a child and figure out how to raise that child without health care, without health insurance, without a way to feed themselves, better yet, a child. It is baffling that our state is forcing people to have children. And you think of those who literally are at risk. You think of underage children who don't have proper prenatal care and how much risk they could be if they have a child. And that's even for grown people who have significant health issues that aren't going to be able to carry a child to term. You think about, literally youth that I see who have absolutely no way or no idea on how to take care of themselves are going to be forced to take care of a child. And if they can't take care of that child, we're going to have another child in a foster care system that isn't equipped to handle that.
More children are at risk because of the population they are born into at being abused, neglected, and that system is on the verge of collapse, the Department of Children's Services in Tennessee. And so it's just this vicious cycle. And I think it goes to show that it goes back to that, like, are you really pro-life if you aren't caring about the children after they're born? And it is why I'm always inviting legislators to come down to juvenile court and see the things that we see down there. They don't ever come because, to me, they don't care. And that's very evident. It's unfortunate because I think if you had boots on the ground and a lot of them who are making these laws are really seeing these things, maybe they would have different ideas, but maybe not.
In the U.S., the rate of unwanted pregnancies is 21% higher than the average of that in other Western countries. According to right-wing rhetoric, the problem is the ubiquitous nature of sex magazines, porn, sex prevention devices like condoms and IUDs, and maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't those things, but the way we talk about them, or more accurately, the way that we don't talk about them. Because we know that abstinence-only sex education fails. These numbers are real life statistics. And when a child comes into this world out of rape, incest, teen pregnancy, or forced motherhood, that's not a good universe for that child, because every child deserves to be wanted and anticipated.
The boy at the time said something to the effect of, well, he didn't think she could get pregnant because she wasn't on her period. And that just kind of goes to show you that no one is teaching them like a basic understanding of just the basic signs of preventing pregnancy and what is happening with a female's or a pregnant person's body, and when they can get pregnant, when they can't, and all of those sorts of things. Teaching abstinence-only sex education programs does not help anybody. And I think you see increased pregnancy rates of teens.
Well, abstinence-only education is just not realistic, because we know that by the time you reach kids in high school, they have already initiated sexual activity. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense at that point. It's not that abstinence is not included in sex education, it's just not the only route to a healthy and fulfilling life.
It's amazing for me a lot of times when I think about where we live and how we as a state have decided not to expand Medicaid, that we as a state don't buy into making sure that everybody has health insurance and health care, that we as a state have one of the lowest education rates.
In writing the majority opinion of Roe v. Wade, Justice Blackmun wrote, "One's philosophy, one's experiences, one's exposure to the raw edges of human existence, one's religious training, one's attitude toward life and family, and their values and the moral standards one establishes and seeks to observe are all likely to influence and to color one's thinking and conclusions about abortion. In addition, population growth, pollution, poverty, and racial overtones tend to complicate and not to simplify the problem." Eerily, this is echoed in the Dobbs decision and the majority opinion written by Justice Alito, where it says, "Given that procuring an abortion is not a fundamental constitutional right, it follows that the states may regulate abortion for legitimate reasons. And when such regulations are challenged under the Constitution, courts cannot substitute their social and economic beliefs for the judgment of legislative bodies." Both the Roe opinion and the Dobbs opinion hint at something called the Hyde Amendment. And as of 2022, the Hyde Amendment prohibits covered funds to be expended for any abortion or to provide health benefits coverage that includes abortion. This restriction, however, does not apply to abortions of pregnancies that are the result of rape or incest, or where a woman would be in danger of death if an abortion is not performed. A significant effect of the Hyde Amendment is that it restricts federally funded abortions under major federal health care programs, such as Medicaid, a cooperative federal-state program that provides medical benefits assistance to low-income individuals, and Medicare, which provides health coverage not only for certain elderly individuals, but also certain disabled individuals under 65. In House Bill 0883 that was passed and restricted abortion in any case in the state of Tennessee, it specifically states that no health care plan can include abortion. This is almost all in reference to Medicare and Medicaid. Thus, for the women and pregnant people who are on Medicare or Medicaid, the poorest women, choice and the right to choose is simply a misnomer, for they cannot choose, because under the law, they have to have their child.
And one thing that we describe ourselves as are being hope dealers for Tennessee, because we don't have a choice. That's the only thing we can be. And I truly am hopeful. But most people in Tennessee want this to be made right. And we just have to give them the avenues to participate and get that done. One thing that gives me hope is that I know that Tennessee is not a red state, it's a low turnout state. And we're one of the lowest voting turnout states in the nation. So our real opportunity here is among occasional voters, unregistered voters, and people who don't vote at all. And those fall into a category that we call the rising American electorate, the people who really have the power here to make change. And those are single women, it's Spanish-speaking voters, it's Black and brown voters. These people have a lot of, could have a lot of sway in elections if we could see participation rates rise.
Want to see outcry of voters and constituents. And because if you look at the percentages of people that support abortion, it is very different than the makeup of the legislators. And so you have to have people not being complacent.
But if I were 22 years old and found myself pregnant in Tennessee and didn't want it, I would immediately hook up with a women's organization, which there are some, that are advocates for going to other states to get legal abortions. And I would rely on those women, because as women, we have learned that we need to band together to get things done. And we need to band together to talk about issues, and we need to band together to make options, because finding yourself without options is probably one of the worst things that can ever happen to a person. So find the people that help make the options.
We help people with the logistics around an abortion. So how do you get from here to there? How do you pay for it? What happens once you get there? And what resources are there available for you once you come home? So really kind of taking that person through that healthcare journey. Primarily what we do is the travel logistics. So we ask folks to make their own appointment. We help them figure out where might be the best place for them to make an appointment. But once they make their appointment, we can be a travel agent of sorts, help them with all the barriers that stand between them and getting there. We can get them an airline ticket, a train ticket. We can help them rent a car. We can get them a hotel room. We can get them a gas card. And we pay for these things for them. Almost every person who calls us qualifies for financial assistance.
Every person has a path. Some people's path is to have kids. Some one kid, some many kids, some no kids. You have to find your path. And when you're put in a situation of an unplanned pregnancy, sometimes you have to find your path really quickly. But you owe it to yourself. You owe it to yourself to be honest about where you're at that time.
And right now, this is what makes what we're so deeply angry about, is that our bodies, our families, and our lives are not at the center of the decision making around the pregnancy. And that's really scary. When I was pregnant with my kids, I felt like my life mattered, and I didn't have to think about these things when I was pregnant here in Tennessee. And that people have to think about it now is just so deeply wrong, and we have to fix it. And the reason that I'm so proud to work for Planned Parenthood now, even though we are in this post-Dobbs era and we can't provide abortion like we used to, we are holding the value of bodily autonomy forward into the future. We have to hold that, and we have to carry it forward. It can't be forgotten.